So there is a new book called Hide Your Children, exposing the Marxists behind the attack on America's kids. The author is Liz Wheeler. You may see her on the First TV, the primetime show, and she joins us now. So Marxists, give me the connection between the commies and the indoctrination of children.
Hi, Bill. Thanks so much for having me on the show today. You know, this is one of the most common questions that I've been getting about my book. It's why I put the word Marxist in the title, because I think as Republicans, as conservatives, it's very important that we acknowledge the reality of the political enemy that we're facing, because if we don't, then we won't fight well against them. We'll lose. I don't want to lose. I don't think anybody watching your program wants to lose. So the connection is this. A lot of people, when they think of Marxism, think of Karl Marx, you know, the Communist Manifesto, this economic Marxism, where the working class is supposed to be discontented with capitalism. They're supposed to overthrow the ruling class and thus usher in communism or Marxism. People say, well, is that what you're talking about, Liz? Is that what's in this book? Well, Bill, let me tell you, when I dived into the research for this book, what I found is that Karl Marx's version of Marxism kind of went out of fashion. He had envisioned a global Marxist revolution, and it didn't happen. It never really came to fruition. But then we have an Italian Marxist by the name of Antonio Gramsci, who's actually the co-founder of the Italian Communist Party. He was in prison in fascist Italy, and he was studying Marxism. And he began to recognize that where there had been successful Marxist revolutions, it wasn't because the working class was economically discontented. It was because the Marxists had undermined, subverted, captured the civil institutions, which means the cultural institutions, on which the working class relied. And Gramsci named, among others, the media, the education system, religion, the law, and the nuclear family. So if you look at what's happening in our country today, we're seeing all of these things. The media is captured. The education system's just indoctrination. Sadly, religious institutions have been corrupted. The law, I mean, Black Lives Matter is doing their best to destroy that. And the nuclear family is under constant assault. Once you see this connection, even if it's to an idea that came from men who lived long before we did, it's hard to unsee it because we're watching it play out before our very eyes.
Okay. There are radical teachers and there are activists in public schools, not too many in private schools, which is why I sent my kids to private school. They're there, but they're not the majority. Okay, the majority of public school teachers and administrators are good, decent human beings who don't want Marxism or anything else like that imposed on the children. So I'm not sure how big a problem the Marxist connection to try to get the children to think a certain way is. How big a problem to you is it?
Well, let me explain it this way. So the word woke, or the idea of wokeness, we're pretty familiar with that. We've said it a lot. We've heard it a lot in the last year. A lot of conservatives aren't necessarily able to define it. They recognize it like, oh, critical race theory, that's woke, or trans ideology, that's woke. But they don't know its origin. So what I did in this book is I traced the origin of the word woke back to a Brazilian Marxist by the name of Paulo Freire, who contended that in the education system, when teachers impart knowledge, they're not imparting reality or truth or fact. They're instead just indoctrinating children with the prevailing political narrative. So Freire proposed this idea that instead of teaching children facts and knowledge, we instead teach them how to think, how to view the world.
But how many of those
critical consciousness?
Liz.
No.
Yes.
Listen to this, because it's right in our classrooms.
Yes, it exists, particularly in places like San Francisco and LA and New York City, where the teachers' unions, all of which are far left progressive, it exists, but I'm not sure how big a problem it is. Now, DeSantis took care of it in Florida by passing laws that you couldn't have certain materials presented to children at certain ages, which I support that law. Okay, but I'm not sure. I'm not undermining your book. The research is fascinating about how the whole thing came about. I think the media is much more of a danger in this area than the school system is. Would I be wrong?
I think so, with all due respect, because when I described this critical consciousness that Paulo Freire was talking about, he was talking about teaching children to view the world through a Marxist worldview, to put people in a demographic either as an oppressor or as oppressed. And this worldview, this critical consciousness, it exists in every single classroom in our country under the heading of social emotional learning. I'm sure you've heard about it. It's disguised as just being values education, but it's teaching children to view the world through the lens of an oppressor or oppressed. I think that's incredibly dangerous. We're seeing the fruits of that. We see how many young people have turned against America, have turned against white people, are embracing critical race theory, the trans ideology even. This kind of grooming that happens in schools is effective.
So you think it's all
where else
over
would it
that?
be coming from if we see the number of children?
You think it's in North Dakota? You think it's all over the place that this wave of woke, and I agree with you, that's the strategy to make the kid into a victim, particularly minority children. You're a victim. Don't worry about if you fail or you don't do anything because it's society that makes you, oppressed. I get it. But I'm not so sure, and I'm going to give you the last word on it, that this is the prevailing wisdom outside of the big urban centers.
Bill O'Reilly is back on TV and only on The First. No Spin News, every weeknight at 8 p.m. Eastern, only on The First.